It is settling into place right now, an invisible dome of superheated air spreading across the western United States, and by this weekend, it will have locked the entire region under a blanket of dangerous, record-threatening heat. 40 million people are now under warnings, from the deserts of the Southwest to the valleys of California, from the interior basins to the foothills of the mountains. An enormous population is bracing for a stretch of days in which the temperature will climb to punishing, potentially historic levels, and refuse to relent. This is a heat dome, one of the most dangerous weather phenomena in the modern world, and the one taking shape now threatens to be among the most severe of the season, a sprawling, stagnant mass of hot air that will bake the West and put tens of millions of lives at risk. This is not an ordinary hot spell. It is a major and potentially historic heat event, and it demands to be taken with the utmost seriousness. In this video, we are going to break down everything about this dangerous event and the phenomenon behind it. We are going to explain exactly what a heat dome is and how it forms, the atmospheric machinery that turns the sky into a lid and traps the heat below. We are going to look at why this particular heat dome is so powerful and why it threatens records across the West. We are going to understand what extreme heat does to the human body, why it is one of the deadliest of all weather hazards, and who is most at risk when the temperatures soar. We are going to examine the dangers beyond the heat itself, the strain on the power grid, and the heightened threat of wildfire that accompany a major heat event. We are going to talk about what people can do to protect themselves, and the vulnerable, the precautions that can mean the difference between safety and tragedy. And we are going to place this event in the larger context of a warming climate, in which heat domes like this one are becoming more frequent, more intense, and more dangerous. Stay with us, because understanding this event could save a life, and because the heat now locking over the West is a warning about the summers to come. To understand why this is so dangerous, you first have to understand what a heat dome actually is, because the term gets used a lot, but is not always well explained. A heat dome is, at its core, a phenomenon of the atmosphere, a situation in which a powerful area of high pressure parks itself over a region and stays there, trapping hot air beneath it and driving the temperatures to extremes. Think of it as a lid clamped over a section of the country, a dome of high pressure in the upper atmosphere that presses down on the air below, and as that air is compressed and sinks, it heats up, growing hotter and hotter. This sinking, compressing air also suppresses the formation of clouds, clearing the skies and allowing the sun to beat down at full strength, adding even more heat to a system that is already overheating. The high pressure acts as a barrier, blocking the weather systems that would normally move through and bring relief, so that the hot air is held in place, day after day, with nothing to break the pattern. This is what makes a heat dome so much more dangerous than a simple hot day. It is not the heat of a single afternoon, but the relentlessness of the heat, the way it settles in and refuses to leave, building on itself day after day as the dome holds firm. Under a heat dome, each day the ground and the air grow a little hotter, the accumulated heat compounding, and there is no relief, no cool front sweeping through, no break in the pattern. Because the dome of high pressure blocks all of that. The heat becomes a siege, a prolonged assault that grinds on for days, and it is this duration and persistence, this relentless accumulation, that makes a heat dome so lethal. A body can endure a single hot day, but a stretch of extreme heat that lasts and lasts, with no relief even at night, wears down the defenses and becomes deadly. There is another reason a heat dome locks in the way it does, and it has to do with the way the flow of the upper atmosphere becomes stuck. Normally, the great rivers of air high above the ground move weather systems along, sweeping them from west to east so that no single pattern lingers for too long. But sometimes, this flow buckles and stalls, forming a great ridge of high pressure that becomes locked in place, and when that happens, the weather beneath it stops moving too. The heat dome is the product of exactly this kind of stuck pattern, a ridge that plants itself over a region and refuses to budge, holding the hot air in place for days on end. This is why a heat dome does not simply pass through in an afternoon, but settles in for a prolonged siege, because the very pattern that creates it is one that resists change, locking the heat over the region until the larger flow of the atmosphere finally shifts and dislodges it. Understanding this stuck, self-reinforcing nature of the heat dome is key to understanding why it is so persistent and so dangerous. The heat dome now forming over the West is a powerful one, and it threatens to bring record or near-record temperatures to a vast area. Across the region, the temperatures are forecast to climb to dangerous extremes, into the range that threatens records for the date and, in some places, approaches the highest levels ever recorded. The desert areas, already among the hottest places in the country, will see the temperature soar to searing heights. The interior valleys and basins, where the heat can concentrate and build, will bake under the dome. Even areas that are usually more moderate will experience temperatures far above normal, pushed into dangerous territory by the strength and reach of the high pressure. The forecast is for a widespread, intense, and prolonged heat event, the kind that prompts the issuance of warnings across an enormous area and puts a huge population on alert. And that is why 40 million people are under warnings. When the weather authorities issue heat warnings and advisories across a region, they are signaling that the conditions are expected to be dangerous, that the heat will reach levels capable of causing serious harm to human health, and that people need to take precautions. For 40 million people to be under such warnings is a measure of the enormous scale of this event, the vast area that the heat dome covers, and the huge number of lives it threatens. These warnings are not routine. They are a serious signal that the heat is expected to be extreme enough to endanger lives, and they call on everyone in the affected area to take the threat seriously, to protect themselves, and to watch out for the vulnerable. To understand why the warnings matter so much, you have to understand what extreme heat actually does to the human body, because the danger is real, and it can be deadly. The human body must keep its internal temperature within a narrow range to function, and it constantly works to shed excess heat to maintain that balance. In moderate conditions, this is easy, but as the temperature of the surrounding air climbs, the task becomes harder, and in extreme heat, the body can be overwhelmed. The primary way the body cools itself in hot conditions is by sweating, the evaporation of moisture from the skin carrying heat away, but this comes at a cost, depleting the body of water and salts. And when the heat is extreme and prolonged, even sweating may not be enough. When the body can no longer shed heat fast enough, its core temperature begins to rise, and this is where the danger becomes acute. As the core temperature climbs, the early stages of heat illness set in, bringing symptoms like weakness, dizziness, nausea, headache, and cramps, the body's warning signs that it is struggling. If the heat stress continues and the core temperature keeps rising, the situation can progress to heat stroke, the most severe and life-threatening form of heat illness, in which the body's temperature regulation fails entirely. In heat stroke, the core temperature soars to dangerous levels. The organs and the brain begin to suffer damage, and without rapid cooling and medical treatment, death can follow. This progression can unfold quickly, and the confusion that comes with heat illness can be especially dangerous, because a person may lose the ability to recognize their peril and take action. Extreme heat is not merely uncomfortable. It is a genuine threat to life, and under a powerful heat dome, that threat extends across the entire affected region. What makes heat so deadly and so often underestimated is the quiet way it kills. Extreme heat is one of the leading weather-related causes of death, killing more people in many years than the storms and floods that grab far more attention. But it kills quietly, individually, often behind closed doors, without the dramatic images of a hurricane or a flood, and so its toll is frequently underappreciated. Under a heat dome, the danger is at its peak, because the relentless, prolonged heat wears down the body over days, and the cumulative stress becomes lethal. This is why the heat dome now forming is so dangerous, because it threatens to subject 40 million people to exactly this kind of relentless, accumulating heat, the kind that quietly claims lives across a region. The danger of the heat dome is compounded by the failure of the nights to cool, which is one of the most important and least understood aspects of extreme heat. Under a normal pattern, the night brings relief, the temperature dropping after the sun goes down, giving the body a chance to recover before the next day. But under a powerful heat dome, the nights may fail to cool sufficiently, the overnight temperatures remaining dangerously high so that the body is denied its chance to recover. This is critically important because the nightly cooling is a key part of how people survive hot weather, and when it is absent, the heat stress accumulates without relief, day and night, growing more dangerous with each passing hour. The heat dome's ability to keep the nights hot is a major reason it is so lethal, turning the heat from an intense but survivable daytime event into a round-the-clock assault that gives the body no respite. Not everyone faces the same level of danger from the heat, and understanding who is most at risk is essential, because the heat hunts the vulnerable first. The elderly are among the most at risk, because their bodies are less able to regulate temperature and cope with heat stress, and they are more likely to have underlying health conditions that the heat can worsen. An older person, especially one living alone, can be in serious danger, particularly if they lack adequate cooling or are unable to recognize and respond to the threat. Young children are also vulnerable, their small bodies more susceptible to overheating. People with chronic health conditions, particularly those affecting the heart or lungs, face heightened risk as the heat strains their already compromised systems. And those who lack access to adequate cooling, whether because they cannot afford it or because their circumstances deny it, are exposed to the full force of the heat with no refuge. There are also those whose circumstances place them directly in the path of the heat, with no escape. People experiencing homelessness are acutely vulnerable, living outdoors in conditions that can be lethal, with little or no access to cooling or shelter. Outdoor workers, the construction workers, the agricultural laborers, the many others whose jobs require them to be outside, face serious danger, forced to endure hours of exposure to the extreme heat in the course of earning their living. For all of these vulnerable groups, the heat dome is not an inconvenience, but a genuine threat to life, and it is among them that the toll of the heat is likely to be heaviest. This is why the warnings emphasize the need to check on the vulnerable, to look out for the elderly neighbors, the isolated, the exposed, because these are the people the heat is most likely to kill. Given all of this, it is worth understanding what people can do to protect themselves and others during a heat dome, because many heat deaths are preventable with the right precautions. The most important thing is to stay cool, to find and remain in air-conditioned or otherwise cooled environments during the hottest parts of the day, whether at home or in public cooling centers established for the purpose. Staying hydrated is essential, drinking plenty of water even before feeling thirsty, because the body loses so much fluid to sweating in extreme heat. Limiting physical activity, especially outdoors and during the heat of the day, reduces the strain on the body. Wearing light clothing, avoiding the direct sun, and taking other sensible measures all help. And crucially, checking on the vulnerable, the elderly relatives and neighbors, those living alone, those without cooling, can save lives. Because the people most at risk are often those least able to help themselves. These precautions are simple, but under a heat dome, they can be the difference between safety and tragedy. It is also important to know the warning signs of heat illness, both in oneself and in others, so that trouble can be recognized and addressed before it becomes a crisis. Symptoms like heavy sweating, weakness, dizziness, nausea, a rapid pulse, or muscle cramps are signals that the body is struggling with the heat and that it is time to cool down, rest, and hydrate. More severe signs, such as confusion, a loss of consciousness, a very high body temperature, or a stopping of sweating despite the heat, indicate a potentially life-threatening emergency that demands immediate action and medical help. Knowing these signs and acting on them quickly can save a life, because heat illness can progress rapidly, and early intervention is far more effective than waiting until the situation becomes dire. During a heat dome, everyone should be alert to these warning signs, in themselves and in the people around them. The heat dome also poses dangers beyond the direct threat to health, because the extreme heat strains the systems that society depends on, and those strains can compound the crisis. One of the most important is the strain on the electrical grid, because as the heat drives everyone to run their air conditioning at full capacity, the demand for electricity soars to enormous levels. This surge in demand stresses the power system, and in the worst cases, it can lead to strain that threatens the reliability of the grid, raising the specter of power outages precisely when the electricity is most desperately needed. A power outage during a heat dome would be catastrophic, cutting off the cooling that keeps people safe and turning homes into dangerous ovens, and the possibility of such an outage is one of the gravest concerns during a major heat event. The heat dome thus threatens not only through the direct effect of the temperature, but through the strain it places on the infrastructure that people depend on to survive it. The heat also raises the danger of wildfire, because the extreme temperatures dry out the vegetation and create conditions ripe for fire. Under a heat dome, the landscape bakes, the plants and grasses and forests losing their moisture and becoming more flammable, so that the risk of wildfires igniting and spreading increases sharply. A heat dome over the west, a region already prone to wildfire, can prime the landscape for dangerous fires, adding another layer of threat to an already dangerous situation. The combination of extreme heat and heightened fire danger is one of the most dangerous aspects of a major heat event in the West, because a wildfire igniting during a heat dome can spread explosively in the hot, dry conditions, threatening lives and property and adding smoke and evacuation to the burdens of the heat. The geography of the West shapes how the heat dome plays out, because the region contains such a range of landscapes, each of which responds to the heat in its own way. In the low deserts of the Southwest, already the hottest places in the country, the heat dome pushes the temperatures to their most extreme, the desert floor baking under the relentless sun and the compressed, sinking air. In the great interior valleys, ringed by mountains that trap the air, the heat can pool and concentrate, building to dangerous levels with little escape. In the basins and the lower elevations, the heat settles and intensifies, while even the higher elevations, usually cooler, are pushed far above their normal temperatures by the strength of the dome. This variety means that the heat dome does not affect the whole region uniformly, but it does raise the danger nearly everywhere it reaches, driving each landscape toward its own extreme. And the sheer size of the affected area, spanning deserts and valleys and basins across the West, is what allows a single heat dome to place so many millions of people under warnings at once, a vast region united by the dome of high pressure locked overhead. There is a particular danger in the way a heat dome can push temperatures to levels that break long-standing records, because records represent the outer edge of what a place has experienced, and exceeding them means entering territory the region is not accustomed to and may not be prepared for. When the heat climbs beyond the established records, it can overwhelm the systems and the habits that people rely on to cope, catching communities off guard and pushing conditions past what the infrastructure and the population are ready to handle. A record-threatening heat dome is dangerous precisely because it takes the region into unfamiliar extremes. And the fact that this event threatens records across the West is a measure of just how severe it is expected to be. The breaking of heat records has also become a more frequent occurrence as the climate warms, a sign that the extremes are shifting upward, and each new record-threatening event is part of that larger and troubling pattern. It is important to place this heat dome in the larger context of a changing climate, because events like this are becoming more frequent and more severe, and understanding why is essential to grasping the full significance of what is happening. Heat domes have always occurred, a natural feature of the atmosphere, but the warming of the climate is making them hotter and more dangerous. As the background temperature of the planet rises, the heat waves that occur start from a higher baseline and reach higher peaks, so that the extremes become more extreme. The warming loads the dice toward more frequent, more intense, and more prolonged heat events, so that the kind of dangerous heat dome now forming over the West is becoming a more regular feature of the summers. This is not to say that this particular event was caused by climate change in any simple sense, but rather that the warming climate is increasing the odds and the severity of such events, making the record-threatening heat that the region now faces more likely and more dangerous than it would have been in the past. This connection to the changing climate is what elevates the story of this heat dome from a passing weather event to a sign of a larger transformation. Each record-threatening heat event is a data point in a longer trend, a manifestation of a climate that is growing hotter and more prone to dangerous extremes. The 40 million people under warnings this weekend are experiencing, in a concentrated and immediate form, the reality of a warming world, the way that the heat is becoming more intense and more dangerous, the way that the summers are being reshaped by the changing climate. And as the warming continues, the region can expect more of these events, more heat domes, more record-threatening temperatures, more warnings, more danger. The heat dome now forming is a preview of a future in which extreme heat becomes an ever more frequent and ever more dangerous feature of life in the West and beyond. For the region now bracing for the heat, the immediate concern is getting through the coming days safely, weathering the siege of the heat dome, and protecting the vulnerable until the pattern finally breaks. The warnings will remain in effect as long as the dangerous conditions persist, and the authorities will be working to protect the public, opening cooling centers, issuing guidance, and watching for the strain on the grid and the danger of fire. The people of the region will need to take the precautions seriously, to stay cool and hydrated, to limit their exposure, and to look out for one another. Because in an event like this, the actions people take can save lives. The heat dome will eventually weaken and move on, the pattern will break, and the relief will come. But until it does, the region faces a dangerous stretch, and the priority must be to get through it without tragedy. It is worth emphasizing, as the heat dome settles in, just how serious this event is, and how important it is not to underestimate it. There is a tendency to treat heat casually, to see a hot forecast as an inconvenience rather than a danger, to shrug off the warnings as overblown. But extreme heat is a genuine killer, and a powerful heat dome like the one now forming is among the most dangerous weather events there is, capable of claiming many lives across a wide region. The 40 million people under warnings are not being warned without reason. They are being warned because the heat is expected to reach levels that can and do kill, because the relentless, prolonged, record-threatening temperatures pose a real and serious threat to life. To take that warning seriously, to respect the danger of the heat and take the necessary precautions, is the difference between a difficult few days and a tragedy. As the dome of high pressure locks into place over the west and the temperatures begin their climb toward record territory, the region enters a period of real danger. A stretch of days in which the heat will test the resilience of the people and the systems that must endure it. This is the reality of a major heat dome, a phenomenon that turns the sky into a lid and the air into a furnace, that bakes a vast region for days on end, that threatens records and lives across an enormous area. 40 million people are in its path, under warnings, bracing for the heat, and the coming days will demand vigilance, preparation, and care. The heat dome is one of the great dangers of the warming world, and the one now forming over the West is a powerful reminder of the threat that extreme heat poses, a threat that is growing as the climate warms, and one that demands to be taken with the utmost seriousness. Stay cool, stay hydrated, check on the vulnerable, and respect the power of the heat